Now here's where we start entering the domain of real programming. But don't be afraid. You can do it. It's all about taking your time, focusing, and being persistent. Programming is all about solving problems with the tools at hand. So we'll introduce the tools and suggest some problems they can solve, and we'll take it one step at a time. By the very nature of HTML, you can set up links for the user to follow, including client-side maps, and that is some degree of user interaction. But people want something more, including feedback to user actions, that is, visual clues that the browser is aware you moved your mouse, clicked on an icon, or keyed in information. And responses to user actions, for example, displaying and hiding details in a list when the user clicks on an expand, contract icon or text. What has evolved over time has been two sets of standards to provide tools to create feedback and responses. First, DOM, D-O-M, the Document Object Model. It provides a standard that lets you specify or identify document components in a scripting language. This allows you to write scripts that can access, change, delete, and insert components on the fly. And by components, we mean elements and their attributes and their content. The other standard is JavaScript, a programming language that specifies a vocabulary and grammar for scripts to be included in an HTML document. Formerly known as ECMAScript, European Computer Manufacturers Association script. Note, you may have heard of the Java programming language. JavaScript is not Java. In this course, in this lesson and some later ones, we look to introduce a practical subset of the entire body of work for DOM and JavaScript. Just scratching the surface, yet providing you with some powerful tools to make your web pages responsive and interactive. A script in the HTML context is a program that runs in response to an event. The standard defines over 50 events. Here are a few of the most useful for our work. Load. This event is raised after an HTML page has been read before being rendered. Unload. Raised when a page is left, for example, when following a link. Click is an event that's raised when the user clicks a mouse button. This actually consists of two distinct actions, each of which can be recognized as events. Mouse down, user presses the mouse button, and mouse up, user releases the mouse button. Double click, two quick successive mouse clicks. Mouse over, pointing device passes over an element's visible area. And mouse out, pointing device exits the element's visible area. We'll look at others later. Typically, one does not trap click at the same time as mouse down and mouse up for the same element. Events are tied to elements. A script that is run in response to an event is called an event handler. Event handlers are specified as attributes of the element they're related to, as on event name. For example, on load, on unload, on click, and so on. For example, here's a P tag, P, on click equals, quote, actions, semicolon, close quote. Text, click on this text to see something, and then your end tag. So, what kinds of actions are available? Well, let's start. The simplest statement in every scripting language is the assignment statement, where one evaluates an expression and puts the result into a variable. The syntax, variable equals expression. The result of evaluating expression is placed into variable. All JavaScript statements end with a semicolon. There may be white space around the equal sign or not. So, now we have to define variables and expressions. A variable is a name you make up that is a place to hold data. The rules are: the name is composed of strings of Unicode letters, digits, the $, and the underscore character. variable names are case sensitive. The first character of a variable name must be a letter, $, or an underscore. There are a number of reserved words that may not be used for variable names, and you're unlikely to choose them anyway, but here's the list: await, break, case, catch, class, const, continue, debugger, default, delete, do, else, export, extends, finally, for, function, if, import, in, instance, of, new, return, super, switch, this, throw, try, type of, var, void, while, with, yield. These words are all JavaScript statements, that is, verbs or helping words, so that's why you can't use them as variables. Now, variables are defined when you reference them in a statement, or you may use the var statement to explicitly define one or more variables, and it's my preference or recommendation to explicitly define variables. For example, var name1, semicolon. Or you can define a list, var name1, comma name2, comma, and so on, semicolon. You may define and initialize one or more variables all at the same time. For example, var I equals 0, comma, j, comma, kite equals 5, semicolon. Note, this ends up with j having an undefined value, which is not an error. Variables in JavaScript are untyped. That is, any variable can hold any type of data supported by JavaScript. This includes numbers, characters, logical values, and so on. Conversions from one type to another is done automatically when needed, or JavaScript throws an exception, that is, raises an error. Now, putting this together, how can we, for example, change the color of some text that belongs to an element when the user presses the mouse down? Clearly, we need to include an onMouseDown event handler in the element start tag, and in that event handler attribute, code an assignment that changes the color value. But color is a property of the style attribute, so we need to code something like style.color equals, quote, color value. Note the use of the period, full stop. This says, I'm interested in talking about the color property of the style attribute of this element. So our first cut might be this: p on mouse down equals, quote, style.color equals, quote, red, semicolon, close quote. Notice the double quotes on the outside and the single quotes on the inside. And then our text. Notice the ending semicolon is inside the double quote. But with this, the text will stay red after you release the mouse button. There's nothing to change the color attribute back. But you could code this: p on mouse down equals, double quote, style.color equals, single quote, red, single quote, semicolon, close quote. That's one attribute. And then on mouse up equals, double quote, style.color equals, single quote, black, single quote, semicolon, double quote. Our text. End tag. The above demonstrates two event handlers for a single element. No problems. Important debugging troubleshooting note. When you have problems with a script, the first thing you should look at is the punctuation. Are the quotes balanced, a closing quote for every open quote? And is there a semicolon at the end of each statement? And then is or are the event handlers totally enclosed in the start tag? Some other notes. There's a hidden secret here. Style.color is really shorthand for this.style.color. And this means the element being handled. If you want to change an attribute or property for an element other than yourself, it's a bit more complicated, but doable. All attribute names are implicitly defined as variables tied to their owning element. For property names that include dashes, you must omit the dash and uppercase the first letter of the second word. For example, font-weight becomes font weight with the W uppercased. For style attributes, each property is defined as a variable with the name of style.propertyName, or, of course, this.style.propertyName. Now, I want to finish the discussion of the assignment statement. Remember, we had variable equals expression semicolon, and we defined what constituted a variable. To finish, we should describe what constitutes an expression. Turns out that's quite extensive, so we'll stick with the simple cases for now. An expression can be a number, for example, 54 or minus 22.56. Do not code a leading zero. That implies a special type of number we won't have any need for, an octal number. The value of this expression is the numeric value. An expression can be a string. For example, now is the time in single quotes, or here we go again in double quotes. A string must be bounded by single quotes or double quotes, and the value for this expression is the string of characters itself. An expression can be a variable, as discussed above. That is, the value of this expression is the current content of the variable. An expression can be a Boolean, a logical value, true or false. An expression can be an arithmetic calculation combining numbers and/or variable values using plus, minus, asterisk for multiply, and slash for divide. For example, 3.5 times CNTR plus roundup. The value is obtained by doing the arithmetic. That's probably enough for right now. In this lesson, we explained a bit more about events and event handlers, and we introduced the term DOM for Document Object Model, although we did not define it nor give examples, and the basics of JavaScript. We demonstrated some sample event handlers and introduced the following terms or concepts for JavaScript: variables, the assignment statement, the var statement, and expressions. In the next lesson, we begin exploring the DOM and how to use it in scripts. See you there.